Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Design Systems and Creativity, Unlikely Allies. My name is Jeremy Osborn. I'm the Academic Director of Aquint Gymnasium, which you can find at thegymnasium.com. And what do? Well, we offer free online courses on topics such as web design, front-end development, user experience, content strategy, and much more. This webinar is the latest in our series of discussions with notable figures in the industry, and today I am joined by two esteemed folks who fit that bill, Brad Frost and Sophie Shepard, who I'll be doing formal introductions with in just a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit about the format of this. I'll be chatting with Sophie and Brad for about 45 minutes, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end to take questions from you all. We have our marketing lead, Kier, in the background, and so she's available for any technical support that might show up. There is a question and answer button in your webinar panel, so feel free to add questions at any point. As I mentioned before, we're going to be answering them at the end. Also, when you're registered, we asked folks to send in questions, and so I'll be sprinkling those in throughout the webinar and spend some time at the end as well. Okay, so on to our guests. We have first Brad Frost, a web designer, speaker, writer, and consultant located in Pittsburgh, PA, the author of the book Atomic Design, which introduces a methodology to create and maintain effective design systems. In addition to co-hosting the Style Guides podcast, Brad has also helped create several tools and resources for web designers, including Pattern Lab, styleguides.io, Style Guide Guide, This is Responsive, and WTF Mobile Web. Welcome, Brad.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming and joining us. Next up, we have Sophie Shepard, a design manager at GitHub. Sophie works on both the web team and the design systems team at the intersection of brand, marketing, and CSS. Prior to that, she was a senior designer at, oh boy, Yusa. I should have researched that.
Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. Which is an open source nonprofit software company, and also HappyCog, a client services agency. Welcome, Sophie. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And you're joining us from Austin, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us. And we're going to kind of have a free-flowing conversation here with some structure. And I think the first topic that we want to talk about is really just this is terminology. So nomenclature, vocabulary, whatever you want to label it. But we name this webinar Design Systems, but we should probably distinguish what that is versus things like design patterns, style guides. It's probably worth just setting that up. So Brad, do you want to take a crack at that, and then we'll see what, so what's the difference between a design system and design pattern in your mind?
Well, a design pattern is sort of a repeatable thing that tends to come up in design. So whether that's, sort of you get a notification for something's been added to your cart, right? That's a pattern you see across different e-commerce sites or whatever. So that's just the general term pattern is something that tends to pop up again and again, right? So you see code patterns, so that translates into, different JavaScript patterns that books have been written on. You see interface like UI patterns, AKA components, AKA patterns. So whenever we talk about pattern libraries, what we're often talking about is a collection of UI components, all sort of displayed as a whole. So that's sort of what a pattern is, right? So pattern is sort of an umbrella term for anything that sort of tends to repeat itself from time to time. I sort of define a design system as sort of like the sort of formal way your organization does design. And that's also a very broad term, and I'd say that's an important distinction, right? Because it includes things like high-level design principles, high-level UX guidelines, low-level sort of code guidelines, how you feel about browser support, how you feel about whatever, the UI components themselves, maybe a sketch library, maybe a Photoshop library, maybe defining processes and defining your workflows and stuff, or defining sort of patterns around sort of end user workflows. So it's like, here's how we think about getting from point A to point F, and here's what you should consider. So it's like basically like how you do things is all sort of like encapsulated in this term design systems, and that's sort of been an evolution over the last couple of years from this sort of pattern library, which is great, you know, like UI components and sort of rounding those up and sort of defining those, because that's sort of like one ingredient in the bigger sort of design system universe. Sophie, I don't know how that jives with your thinking, but I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I think that nails it. I think with all of these, there's so many words that people use, like style guides, pattern library, design patterns. I would say out of all of those, design systems is the broadest and encompasses all of them. So it's more than just CSS, it's more than just colors and fonts, but it also includes all of the other pieces that define a design.
Yeah, and I have a question too for maybe both of you, but Sophie, you can take it first. And so when's the first time you kind of encountered one of these design systems? Were you a designer who kind of walked into an environment where someone's like, hey, here is this thing that you need to use? Or was it something else?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I first encountered a type of design system when I was working at Happy Cog. And I think design systems have existed for a lot longer than any of us have been working in this stuff. Probably starting out, I mean, definitely starting out beyond this. But in my experience, it's just brand guidelines that were given to me that were very print-based or very basic, that then I had to translate into a web language for a website. And so I think that's where I first encountered them.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think the web itself, it lends itself to design patterns, just the way HTML and CSS are structured. So I think that was a very interesting, like taking those and then translating them into things that are reusable for the web.
Sure.
Is a very interesting crossroads.
Right. And one of the concepts that we kind of framed this discussion around is this idea of creativity and design systems. And so, you know, one of the proposals you could make is that you know, these systems and these patterns are great at doing things like standardization, making sure everyone's on the same page and making sure that all the buttons look the same, and some of the things you were just mentioning. You know, the flip side of that is does it make us feel constrained? So again, even as a designer, and one of the reasons I'm interested in like that first experience with those is, you know, was it a liberating experience, or were you kind of like, oh boy, I feel like I'm constrained by some of these rules and I'm being forced to follow? And I think this is kind of an interesting question. So, you know, maybe back to Brad for a second, just like when was the first time that you encountered a design system, and what was your initial reaction to it? Were you like, yes, I've been waiting for this the whole time, or what was it?
Yeah, so sort of similar to Sophie, sort of working at an agency, we'd sort of receive different different brand style guides and stuff like that, and so some of them actually in the form of like a hardbound book, which was pretty fun. And so we'd sort of have to take that, and so it's like, oh, here's the PMS color value, so like what's the hex equivalent of that and stuff. So it sounds like we have like similar experiences there, Sophie. And then I think for me, as sort of responsive design came around, I ended up making a site called This Is Responsive, which was sort of a collection of different sort of UI patterns. Because as I started doing these sites in those sort of early days, it's like it's not that the home page is hard to make responsive. It's specifically the navigation that I'm struggling with or whatever. And there's like, a few different ways to cut it. So I ended up sort of collecting and sort of demonstrating just some like vanilla like UI patterns where it's like, you could squish your screen and they do this and they stack on top of each other. You could squish your screen and do this, and then it slides in from the left, and you could do this. Yeah, so just sort of rounding that stuff up. So that's sort of where my mind went. And then really for me, the first big sort of bombshell, I joke around, this is like the Boston Globe of design systems, but is the Starbucks design system. So whenever Starbucks released their new responsive site, alongside of it, they released their pattern library. So that the UI components that made up their new shiny responsive site. And so it was a pretty simple, just like index page and like, linking to the pattern. So there's no real like documentation, like implementation details or anything. It was just like showcasing those UI patterns. And that was like, there it is. So whenever I saw that stuff, I was super inspired at going like, that looks good, rather than, oh, that's a terrible way to do things. Like, why would you like limit the amount of patterns that you have in your vocabulary?
Yeah, it kind of leads to an interesting point. I never thought of that way. In many ways, that the era of responsive design kind of seems like it was a catalyst. It kind of kickstarted a lot of this. Because as you both mentioned, style guides have been around for a long time, but it does seem like the advent of the responsive challenges, right? Having to design for different screens, and all of a sudden you've got one site that feels like it's a couple different sites because things are changing and squishing and all that, seems to really be a part of it. So so one of the things I wanted to show, and we're going to try this. So Sophie, this is something you worked on. You sent me a link to Primer, and if I shared that, I'm wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about what's on screen here. So I want to make sure that this is visible. Everyone can see this. So explain what Primer is exactly.
Sure. So this, as of right now, and we're working on it behind the scenes, and it's going to be released pretty soon, probably in the next couple months. But this is a previous version of Primer. So I work with Mark Otto, who is one of the maintainers of Bootstrap. So when he came over to GitHub, I think he kind of realized like, oh, we don't have a component library or a pattern library for the pieces that build up GitHub. So this, as you can see here, there's all the different layout pieces, buttons, type, all of the kind of micro elements that build up GitHub, the app. We still use a lot of this as I think this was maybe released 2 years ago, 3 years ago. This has since, while the base is still there, it's not as extensible as we need it to be, and not as broad. So these are all of the pieces that power the GitHub app itself, but we have a lot of other web properties that are not github.com, the product. So we've grown out Primer to include all of our marketing styles, to include voice and tone documentation. I think the technology of how you can install this has changed since this was released. The grid here, I don't believe is responsive. So we're kind of rehauling all of this, but we are planning on open sourcing it.
Well, and for folks in the audience, there may be folks watching this who have never really explored a design pattern library or system before, and so it's kind of worth like taking a look at. These things are organized into very interesting categories: layout, type, buttons, navigation, alerts. Then you have some code guidelines here, which is kind of interesting, so that again, for folks jumping onto a project, they have the ability to go in and see some of the standards that the team works on. And you had sent me a couple others as well, and it seems like this is kind of a growing practice. And Brad, you were talking about the Starbucks system earlier, and it seems like a lot of organizations are beginning to share their pattern libraries with the world. So this is the one for BuzzFeed, which again kind of has a listing of the typography, headers, sizes, listing the various colors, as well as the hexadecimal and sats stuff. So I'm kind of curious, like, what is the benefit of sharing, your system and your pattern library with the rest of the world? Like, what benefit does an organization get from that?
Are you asking me or Sophie?
I'll ask you, and then we can switch over to we can switch back to Sophie.
Okay. Well, so in my experience, I guess I guess a quick plug here, but so Anna Debenham in the UK, who's been talking about pattern libraries for a long time, she made a site, and I sort of help make that site and help sort of maintain it. But we collect all the organizations that have published their style guides in the open.
Oh, cool.
in design systems. So that's called styleguides.io.
Oh, nice.
And so that's like a resource site. So if your organization is working on one, you can sort of peruse. It's now, there's tons of them now, which is awesome. So if you go to examples, we finally added numbers to each one of them. But so there's, so 186 of them you can sort of peruse and stuff. And there's a bunch of different kinds and flavors. Some are focused more on voice and tone, other ones are all encompassing, and other ones are more just sort of UI patterns and stuff like that, and various combinations of all those things. So
that's fantastic. This is a great resource.
Yeah. So again, it's just like we just keep throwing them on the pile as more organizations release them, and the reason why they're releasing them is manyfold, I think. One, in my own work as a consultant, so I go in and talk about this stuff with different companies and get to see sort of what they're working on. Oftentimes they'll have an effort like this in place. It's like, oh yeah, Jim's been working over here on he's doing it somewhere. It's like, oh, okay, can we take a look at it? It's like, oh, I'll have to get the link. So there's one, just like a basic visibility, not just like for the entire world, but for the organization. But that visibility, as it's sort of open to the public, sort of serves a big deal. And I'd love to hear Sophie's take on this and stuff. But like for accountability, like it's like, this is something we're putting out, we're sharing with the world. We better be building and designing like this if we're broadcasting this out to the broader community. So that sort of helps that along a little bit. So like visibility, accountability. Then the other thing is huge is recruiting. So we talked with Gina Ann, who whenever she's been working with style guides and all sorts of stuff for a long time. She's like one of the most like amazing designers out there. She was at Apple, like working on like a lot of that stuff, like before any of us. And she saw Salesforce release a product called Salesforce One, and they released alongside it a sort of pattern library for that, and they opened that up. And she didn't work there at the time, and she was like, oh wow, like this is incredible work, I need to go work there. And she now works there, and she's the one responsible for sort of shepherding the whole Lightning design system and getting that off the ground. And so now basically they have what I'd consider to be like the high water mark in our industry, all because Salesforce was like, hey, we should just like put this online, right? And then the last thing I'd say is that it is just like the general sort of spirit of the web to open things up and to share and collaborate and learn from each other. And I am 130% on board with that mentality.
Math checks out. So Sophie, so tell me about what's your take on it? Why share this stuff, and what benefit does, for example, GitHub and the other folks you've been working with get from this?
I think I personally, from reading other people's public style guides, have learned so much. Just like, I don't know, I think as a whole, it moves the industry along a little faster.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're trying to figure out, we're all solving the same problems. So if we try to do them on our own, we may get to the same solution, but it's going to take a lot longer than if we all do it together. So I personally very much appreciate seeing what other people are doing. And I think it's also interesting to be able to, like, for example, Salesforce, their style guide and design system may serve a very different purpose than what ours is, or BuzzFeed, they're an editorial site. But I think by comparing and contrasting all of these, there's a lot to be learned. For us personally, I think since GitHub is such a champion of open source, it feels like it's just, I don't know, a principle of ours to share things with the world. I think also by open sourcing it, it not only may help other people, but people may in return help us. And already, while our documentation is not open source, all of the CSS is open to the public. So we get people like opening issues and fixing things, and that helps us a lot as well, just to, we're in the weeds with this and we may not notice where things can be improved. So that's very helpful too.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And so I'm curious, so to get back to this issue of creativity, so if I can understand it correctly, so we have this need for these systems that make our lives easier, right? And we're all solving the same problems. What kind of approaches do we take? Because it seems to me like, is it a matter of, okay, a designer creates a page and then we reverse engineer these components and we turn those into kind of a system or a library? Or does it work the other way around? Do we create smaller pieces and then build up to pages? And with all of that, like, where does the actual, where does the creation and the creativity part come in terms of exploring ideas and really kind of getting into the fundamentals of design? I think that's a question I'm kind of curious to hear both takes on. And Sophie, you can start if you want.
Sure. Yeah. The way we do it at GitHub, I think it's not really a chicken or the egg kind of thing. They're always affecting each other. So the style guide / design system is not, it's the point of truth, but it's changeable. It's not set in stone. So there's always kind of a push and pull between the people producing things and then the team that maintains the design system. And the way we structure it, which has worked really well, is it's run very much like an open source project internally. So we have a core team of 3 people that maintain the design system, and they take care of things like, how do we distribute it? How do we refactor existing styles? They help write documentation and make sure that it's always up to date. But then we also have contributors from other teams within the company that then come back based on what they're working on to say, hey, we need this pattern for this thing. I noticed we don't have it. Or like, I can help write documentation on branding. And we have contributors from the editorial team, so they come back and write documentation on how things should be written. We have the web team, so we do all of the marketing sites, the product design team, and then also the graphic design and creative team. So from all over the place, all these people who are using the design system that's in place, there's a constant feedback loop coming back. And even not just feedback, but like, I can open a pull request to add a pattern that I needed that's not there. And then the design systems team, as the maintainers and the gatekeepers, are able to say, okay, yes, I see a need for that pattern, we'll add it in. And it could also be helpful for this person over here. So it's this constant, like, moving amorphous thing between different practices and then the core maintainers who are able to see it all holistically and keep it clean and keep it making sense for everybody.
So it's basically like someone's job to kind of pay attention to the the integrity of the system, or they're just the one who are like checking in and like on a daily basis and that sort of thing?
Yeah, they're basically, like, for example, we recently went through a color overhaul. So the graphic designers have an opinion about what the brand color should be so that things feel friendly and work well. The product designers have an opinion on, like, here's what a green button should do versus a blue button. Then we have people who are accessibility experts. So they have to say, well, this needs to pass this contrast and this, da, 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 da. And then the design systems team needs to take all of this feedback from each person's individual experience and wants and make the final call.
Huh. That's kind of cool. So Brad, what's your take? What's on this idea of, again, like, where does the design and creative process typically come in? And I know that's asking a lot because they're different size organizations, but what's your experience in that area?
Well, first I'll say I think Sophie did a beautiful job at sort of painting this. There's a balance and several different perspectives for what makes a successful design system. One is having like a sort of a holistic bird's eye view, sort of system-wide perspective over like all the organization's products, all the different sort of use cases, all the different sort of factors and stuff that goes in there that the system needs to have baked into it, right? So a green button is a great example of that, right? For all the reasons that Sophie just said. And then there's people on specific teams that are utilizing those patterns and you know, they might not be thinking about the color contrast, but they get that for free just by way of implementing it. But that sort of this sort of transitions a little into the creativity part of it, which is, I'm a designer. I want to do whatever the hell I want, right? Like I don't want a green button. I want a purple button. And it's and historically that's been the case. Just even with the same designer across 4 different Photoshop comps in my career, there's just been wild inconsistencies, and it's often done in the name of expression or creativity. And it's like, I get it. That's important. Obviously, the ability to sort of work through different things is important, and that process still exists, by the way. Like in the creation, so I've been responsible for creating several design systems now, some that are designed to be used by over 500 web applications in an organization. So it's like giant organization, huge enterprise, like tons and tons of people. So, but at the same time, they didn't have any sort of semblance of sort of creativity. So we went through the creative process, how we arrive at those patterns, right, that end up getting used. Once those patterns are settled, yes, it is true that there's a little bit of constriction going on, right, where you don't just get to do things however you want. These things are being put in place for a reason. But that's not to say that those patterns didn't come into existence through some stodgy, rigid process. The creative process that leads to the creation of a design system is one wherever you have to go into, let's explore brand, let's explore voice, let's explore typography, let's do all of that stuff that we've always done to create oftentimes just like a single, whether that's like a marketing site or an e-commerce site or a web application, like a single thing. We're just sort of applying that same creative process to something that is a little more all-encompassing. And with that comes more considerations, back to Sophie's point, about accessibility, about performance, about flexibility, about, you name it, right? So it's not like we need this button to work well, or this card pattern to look really good for a product listing page on an e-commerce site. Well, we're also sort of designing this thing so that it actually might be able to be reused in entirely different contexts. And that's a beautiful thing, right? Once you have these things in place, you get those efficiencies. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you launch a new feature, launch a new product. So you get that stuff for free. And again, some of that can involve like, oh, this card pattern isn't doing what I need it to do, or I need this one to pop a little bit more. And back to what Sophie was just describing with the organization's process, you can sort of unpack that and say, okay, yeah, maybe this card pattern is, this is a good like vanilla one, but we need one where like the colors are reversed so it really stands out or something. And then that's a conversation you have. So it is this ongoing evolution and iteration over a creative process. But I personally just get really infuriated whenever people are like I can't do whatever I want anymore. And the answer is you never should have been able to do whatever you want. Like there's a reason why these sort of like guardrails and things like exist, right?
That's where you end up with like the same company. They have like different departments, and they have like these little feudal systems, right? It's a little Game of Thrones situation where you got these different kingdoms, and like, okay, I'm in charge of my section here, and it's going to look this way, and then it becomes like a strange like organizational battle and so forth.
And it's like, I really love the color orange, and you could pry it from my cold dead hands and stuff. So,
that's right. I'm still I'm kind of curious to know. So it sounds like there's a pretty good case being made for like creating these systems with big sites where you've got a lot of moving parts, and you've got a team of people who have specific roles, and they can all contribute, and it sounds like a pretty good working situation. But I'm curious if like there's like a continuum of, okay, so a huge website needs some sort of design pattern. Does the one-page portfolio that I'm creating for a friend of mine, like, does that need a system? Well, probably not. But on that continuum, like where should we start using them, and how do you decide like when's the time to do that? And Sophie, you can take that if you want.
My original answer was going to be if there's more than one or two people or more than one person working on something, I think it's helpful. But I think even then, maybe you don't need it. That's hard to say. Personally, at my last job, I redid one of the sites, and it was just me and another guy. We really didn't need it, but we ended up making a style guide pattern library alongside, almost just to help the front end development go a little smoother. And I think it can help even if it's not to serve the purpose of documenting something. I found that it helps you write your code a little better. So even if it's just you working alone, it can't hurt. And I think that some people may see it as extra work, but I think it's actually kind of giving you a head start on the work you're already doing. And if there's any risk that someone else will take on that site, then it's worth doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Brad, any thoughts on that? Is that
I've got tons of opinions on it. Just so people ask me a lot, like, I work on this thing, we make QR codes and then build these landing pages, and these things have a shelf life of 2 weeks or whatever. So it's like, we're not building like this thing that's meant to like stand the test of time. Like, time out real quick here, because so you're building landing pages again and again and again and again. And they take 2 weeks each time or whatever. Or the process is 100% effort. And they're like, yeah, that's right. It's crazy. So, I struggle to find, even for just even a personal site. It's like, yeah, obviously you have your brain, but brain plus time gets goofy. Like, even with my personal site right now, I'm redoing that, and I'm actually doing it the same way I would do a giant enterprise site, because I'm actually going to take the time to document this stuff and do it, because it makes me a better designer. It makes me a better developer as a result. The other thing too, so I took on a project sort of the same way that some people drunk buy things off of QVC and stuff. I decided to this person got in touch with me. They're running for Congress, and they're like, "Hey, how would you be interested in making a website for me?" I said, "All right. Well, when is it due?" The 17th, which is today, by the way. This was not this last Friday, but the previous Friday. So we had 9 days to make a site. And so this is, a 6 to 8 page, mostly static site with a few forms, and that's it. And, so I could have just gone, all right, all this atomic design, all this patterns, all this whatever. It's like, nah, we don't have time for that. We don't have time to sort of do this. In fact, is the opposite happens, right? You spend the time to create a couple patterns. By the time you get to that 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th page, you're not having to recreate patterns or create patterns. You're just reaching for existing patterns, right? And sort of doing that in a thoughtful way allows you to very quickly stitch together the sites that you need. And then the beautiful part is back to creativity and stuff. You can then sort of say, okay, I have this toggle pattern going on in 3 of these different things. I'm pouring different labels inside of these toggles. One, does this pattern still hold up as I, use it in these different places? But then also, if I iterate over the design and add drop shadows and border radii and blah, 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 and all that stuff permeates out to everywhere that's included. So you get this tremendous efficiency, even for a small site, even for a site that you can probably make an argument. It's like, oh, we don't have time for that. It's like, well, guess what? We just launched, I think, a way higher quality site for, in a week.
Right.
So I really struggle anymore, even if it's just for your future self or if there's that one other person on your team or whatever. I struggle to find where it's just not a good idea.
Yeah. Sophie, anything to add to that, or is that sounds pretty solid? Yeah. So one of the things that I was it's really interesting to me how, again, it seems like there's a lot of movement in the industry towards this. We had Jeremy Keith's Patterns Day recently. Of course, Ethan Marcotte came out with his Responsive Patterns book, and Ethan actually had tweeted something or retweeted something that was interesting, which had to do with the best design systems are the ones that are actually used. And then that kind of, right, which kind of triggers a lot of good questions. And Sophie, one of the things when we were doing our email back and forth earlier that you had brought up was this importance of documentation, right? So it's almost like they go hand in hand, but I'm interested to hear more about why that seemed important to you. What's the role of documentation in these systems?
I think the alternative is that it's in someone's brain, and that is not reliable at all. People leave companies, people forget things. I forget things that I've done yesterday. And then I think it also just requires, in the times where I've done work and not documented it, it takes, at best 5 minutes of my time to reply to something. Hey, by the way, we've already done this. At worst, it gets duplicated. The work gets duplicated. The code base gets duplicated. So yeah, I feel very strongly. I'm sure someone needs to be credited with this, but with the idea that if it's not documented, it doesn't exist in a design system.
Miriam Suzanne.
Is that?
I believe so, yeah. Who created the Suzy framework stuff. But yeah, she was at Clarity. She was like, it's not documented, it doesn't exist. I love that.
I say that, all the time. I say that. And I think it's so true.
And it helps you, I think, too, just back to your point earlier, Sophie, it's it just helps you be a better designer and developer. It's to have to explain something, the concept of rubber ducking or whatever, wherever you just have to walk through Just like, here's what this thing does, and like, here's why it exists. Like, here's why it deserves to exist. Like that requires like a level of, you have to scrutinize like your decisions. Yeah, like, so it makes you better. It makes your products better. And it's just that.
Well, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes before we kind of switch over to some of the questions. But before we do that, a couple other things. So we've talked a lot about the overall framework, and it's I think we made a pretty good case, and there's a lot of evidence that should definitely consider doing this. So we should talk a little bit about like the how, like in terms of like what are these even some of the stuff that I'll just go back to some of those examples that he had. So this is one from Shopify, and they have these sections divided into principles, content, visuals, components. But it seems to me like this is kind of just HTML and CSS. But what are some of the what are the processes? What's some of the software? What's some of the tooling? Is it all just HTML, CSS, and putting your code online like they have here? Looks like they're using React components as well. But I'm kind of curious to do a little, discussion on, what is some of the tooling? What does that look like? So, Sophie, you want to take that, or how do the folks there at GitHub do it?
Sure. So what we do, and we have many things documented in our style guide. So it's not only HTML and CSS. We have like general principles, voice and tone, various graphic design assets, how we use our logos. So that all is part of it. But in terms of tooling, this is part of what we've been doing recently, and part of the behind the scenes overhaul of Primer. So what we have is we have a mono repo that has all of the individual packages, and I think for the most part a package maps to a pattern. Starting, some of the very base ones aren't patterns that can be used on their own, but they're rather like things that support other patterns and that build up other patterns. So each of those get published into their own repos as well. So you can, let's say I'm doing a marketing site that doesn't need all of the CSS that GitHub, the product, uses. We've made it very easy it's almost like a palette where you can pick and choose the pieces that you need and install those into a web property. And then in terms of the tooling, right now it's pretty basic CSS. I mean, we use Sass, but we try to not use too much Sass just because I think it gets a little messy and confusing. So keeping it pretty basic. I think at some point in the future, the goal is to move into a component-based kind of React components, but we're still in the phase of we've got years of CSS to clean up and to organize into each of those different modules. So that's what we're doing right now. Okay.
So Brad, tools, software, like what kind of, what are is there anything special that we need to do with these systems? Or, is there like a Photoshop or like, Illustrator of design systems, or what sort of tools are there that you're familiar with?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's worth underscoring that whatever tools you use are tools that your organization uses, right? So again, back to the whole notion of the best design system is the one that gets used. The worst thing you could do is like, you're working on some like .NET thing or PHP thing, and then you're like, check out our cool new like React-based component library. It's like, that's a surefire way to make sure things don't get used. Right. But that happens. Oh my God, that happens. So there is there's an infatuation with technology, specific technologies. So I wrote a post called Managing Technology Agnostic Design Systems, which sounds a little wordy, but at the same time, like what it is it's meant to sort of talk through some of my experience that I have working with different organizations that use a whole slew of different technologies. So some things are in React, some things are in WordPress, some things are in Drupal, some things are in whatever. There's native stuff lying around. Like, so especially as an organization gets bigger, right? You need sort of a way to sort of create a consistent, cohesive UI. And that UI is sort of how that UI gets there onto the screen. It's sort of neither here nor there, right? It's like, how are those buttons coded, right? How is that stuff served up? Who cares? From a user perspective, they're not like, oh, this looks like an Angular app, right? Like they don't think that way. They think that as I move from this part of the experience to the other, I want it to be familiar and cohesive and all that stuff. So that's part of it. So I'd say whatever your organization is using, you have to create a strategy to create a design system that's able to serve all those different technologies that you use. From a tooling perspective, one of the other things that I finally feel like I sort of have my head around as far as like actually talking about this stuff in a thoughtful way is this notion, this sort of analogy between the workshop and the storefront. And I wrote a blog post about it, but there's basically an environment where the team is working in to create stuff, to create like the UI patterns, to kick the tires, to make sure that they're stress tested, cross-browser tested, they're accessible, they're performant, whatever. This is like the sort of like workshop, right? And so my wife, she's a jewelry designer, and her workshop is like crazy messy and stuff, but it's where she's able to do her best work, right? She's able to be creative, throw a bunch of things against the wall, see what sticks, and so on. And we need that environment. But then there's also the environments that we use to sort of sell our work or present our work. And that takes the form in our universe as the style guide, right? So the style guide is often this sort of, you know, typically a web-based thing, right? It's just like a static HTML, CSS, JavaScript site or whatever. So you're showing Polaris, you're showing, you know, Lightning, you're showing Primer and all that. That's just, those are web pages. Yep. And that houses all the guts of the design system. So that's back to sort of terminology. I think of the style guide as a place you can go to see all the guts and navigate the guts of the design system. But so that style guide is an important piece of the puzzle, and you can spin one of those up pretty quickly. In fact, I made a tool called the Style Guide Guide. Which is basically like a vanilla version of, if you can Google that or put that up on screen. But it's just like a vanilla like starting point for creating a style guide. And so it's like you have to fill in the blanks. You have to sort of structure things and, you know, put in your voice to tone guidelines and put in your button patterns and put in your code guidelines and stuff like that. But it's at least like a little bit of scaffolding to get things off the ground. I've done some workshops recently with some people where different companies where I've gone in a half a day, we've actually gotten a style guide off the ground, which is pretty cool. So obviously they still had work to do after I left, but it's like at least to get the ball rolling. So
this is a great resource. This is like meta. We're going totally meta here. Style guide. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, well done. So let's flip over just a second to talk about to look at some questions from some of the folks. And again, if you're in the audience, we'll take some of those live here, but we do have some ones that folks sent in ahead of time. So, and I pulled out some of the ones that I kind of saw themes emerging. So even though I'm only pointing out one of these, oftentimes we had multiple questions. So here's one. So this is kind of interesting from John M. How do you convince a senior designer that a design system is intellectually significant, not just trendy nonsense? So I picked up the funny one there, but I think behind that is kind of a question of like, okay, as a designer, you might be on board with it, but your organization might not, or they need convincing. And so, you know, is there a way to put this in dollar and cents terms? Is there, you know, how do you begin to qualify that? And either of you can take that.
I can take it. I can try to.
Yeah.
I would first, it's kind of harsh, but I would make the argument that they shouldn't be a senior designer.
That was the first thing popped through my head.
And I think that I can see, and I personally, at times, am a cynic when it comes to like web trends. But I think that the idea of design staying consistent, especially like UI design, I think consistency is a important thing for a good user experience, and not only like how someone's interacting with something, but it helps with performance. I think that any good designer should see the value in that. And I think that they should see that it will also make their life easier. So it's not, we are making it for other people, but it helps you as much as it helps anyone else. So I would hope that they could see that value. I think that maybe sometimes people want to have a design system just as a marketing tool, which I think there's value in that as well. But first and foremost, it should help the team internally. And hopefully most good designers should be on board with that.
Okay. I want to fire through a couple of these questions, so I'll kind of, jump back and forth between the two of you, and then again, if the other one has something that they desperately need to say, feel free. But here, I thought this was an interesting question that we just got from Paul, who said, when working in design patterns, how do you keep fresh design concepts coming from yourself or staff? So Brad, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that it's, whenever you have a pattern library in place, so you've established and have documented your UI components, you're then in a position of strength to be able to sort of revisit and analyze and sort of iterate over those things. So, from time to time, there are, hot drama, sort of trendy sort of things that people have strong opinions on, or they're part of the zeitgeist of the industry, and then they sort of fall out of favor. So a couple good examples of this, like the hamburger icon. Okay, so sort of like sliding drawer, just put all the navigation in there. A few more studies come out that are like, hey, these actually aren't all that efficient and stuff. And so you actually see organizations like Google with their material design language introducing like a bottom tab bar, which was, formerly taboo in the Android universe. And now they're like, hey, actually this checks out. Right, this is good. So, but just by having that stuff documented in the first place gives you the opportunity to have thoughtful conversations about, should we keep doing it this way? Do we do float labels? Do we not do float labels? When's it? It's about being thoughtful and deliberate and stuff like that. So I think the spirit of the question touches at something that is very common for everyone to. And I'd say it's even bundled up in the title of this webinar, is this whole idea of, a design system as like a set of handcuffs, where it's like, once things are in place, like there's, pencils down, nobody innovates anymore. Just shut up and do your job. Like we've already solved like literally everything, and that's just patently false. It's this is a huge opportunity to create an environment where things are constantly improved upon. And the beauty of it is that because you're not reinventing the wheel or the card pattern for the 15th time, you're able to free yourself up to sort of, check out that color contrast for those buttons. So you're able to sort of work on micro interactions or animations or stuff. So you free yourself up to do more meaningful tasks.
Cool. Yeah. Well said. And yeah, I totally agree. Okay, let's switch over to one of the previously submitted questions, and again, this is one that kind of came up in almost a number of different ways. So, when a new website isn't an option, how do you incorporate these principles into a messy, decade-old corporate site? So again, I think this is a pretty fair question. If the idea we have these legacy sites out there, or just sites that are huge, right? They're just thousands of pages, and where do you start with that? Is it a matter of reverse engineering, and what sort of process might one take with that? So Sophie, I don't know if you had any ideas on that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to plug an old classic Frost blog post here, but I think what I would start with always is an audit and a pattern audit, and I think that really helps to show the value. So when you do have that old decade-old site, and you can start to say, like, we have 3 or 4 different versions of what could be one pattern, that really helps to sell the value of a design system and to show, there you go, show where things need to be fixed. So this is a great example.
So what is this, Brad? An interface inventory. So it looks like you kind of go through a site, kind of look for.
It's just an exercise. So to Sophie's point, so you sit down, hopefully with the whole team. The more people that are involved, the better. And you sort of comb through and like, okay, you're going to take buttons. Okay, you're going to take icons. Okay, you're going to take nav patterns. Okay, you're going to take cards and other blocks and stuff like that. And you're going to take different image sizes and stuff. And we basically start clustering them together, pointing out those inconsistencies. And then to Sophie's point, have a conversation of like, which one is the right one? Or is it some fusion of all of these? Or, should this stay or go? Should this, so we often do this and round them up in like in a spreadsheet, and there's a fate column. So it's basically like keep or kill or discuss or whatever. So that's a great first step to start trying to sort of get your head around, like, you first have to know like just like how bad it is. And it also really does help get at like, oh wow, we just encountered like so many different data table patterns or something. That's actually, a lot of that stuff provides clues as to like what like the MVP, like the minimum viable product of your design system should include, are those sort of like meat and potatoes patterns that tend to pop up again and again.
Well, yeah, that sounds like good advice. I mean, one of the things we tend to do, and we're getting close to the end of this. We have tons of great questions going on, but one of the things we often ask our guests is some advice for people diving into this topic. And so in a way, that kind of sounds like we stole the thunder there. That sounds like great advice. Like, go into an existing site and start just cataloging things that need attention. But Sophie, what kind of advice would you give for someone who is like hearing this or is finally kind of tuning into the benefit of design systems? Like, where's a good place to start?
I think that in my experience, this stuff is often started by people who this isn't their primary job. It's someone who sees a need within an organization and then just jumps on it. So I think my advice would be, if you're that person, just do it. It'll feel like a lot of extra work at first, and it'll kind of stink, but over time, if you just kind of trudge through the beginning of it, I think people pretty quickly recognize the value in it.
Yeah, Brad, I know you're a big fan of just kind of going out and doing it and asking for forgiveness later, right?
No, that's precisely you don't need to drop some like 70-page proposal or something to like. Eventually, that might be the case, but just make something. Just like, if you find yourself writing the same email 2 or 3 times, then just put that somewhere at a link, at a URL that you could send people, and just, it is as simple as that. It's like, it can be really grassroots to get it up to, just get it off the ground, and that helps you eventually when it comes to twisting the arm of the people who need to, shell out funding for this stuff or free up people's time and resources for it. It helps to actually like have something started to go like, look, like we have something, the team's loving it, this is great. Like, can we take it to the next level? It's so much easier to start from like something rather than just talking about things in this very like ephemeral,
Right.
sort of like hypothetical sort of, hey, we should do this. And, oh,
Right.
that sounds hard. Just get started.
Right. And we'd also be remiss if we didn't say that you've thought a lot about this stuff, and you've even kind of written about it. So tell us briefly about like atomic design, and where can people learn about what atomic design is, and where they can learn more about it.
Yeah, so I wrote a whole book called Atomic Design that does detail like the whole process of selling people, of getting like different people on board with like the benefits of it and stuff like that. So you can dive into that, and that's just atomicdesign.bradfrost.com or whatever. But and I love it. Like I can't speak, I've lived that experience, which is what obviously led to the book, but I've since had like lots and lots of really nice emails of people saying that, it was the nudge my team needed or my boss needed or whatever to like get over the hump and actually commit to this, and we're in a much better place now. So that's, especially when it comes to like the mechanics of actually like making something and then also maintaining it after it's made. It sort of goes into detail about all that. So
excellent. So folks out there interested, you should go buy Brad's book, and we're going to wrap up at this point. So I do want to just kind of tie things up a little bit. So thanks both of you for joining. This was really, really, really cool. I'm so happy you could be a part of it. And you can, for the folks in the audience, you can follow or check out what Brad and Sophie are doing on their Twitters. So at Brad Frost and at Soph Shepard. And also in terms of us at Aquent Gymnasium, again, we're going to be posting a link to this video. So if you want to share this with friends and family and coworkers and that senior designer who really doesn't deserve the job, then you should follow us.
I'm sure they have a lot of skills.
Yep. You should follow us at Aquent Gymnasium. You can also follow me at Jeremias. So once again, thank you both. This is really cool, and I'm glad that you could join us. And thanks to all of you who checked us out. And that's it. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.